Silva Zoldyck is in a lot of danger, depending on whether he had to make a new ability or he managed to get his old one back from Chrollo. Because Chrollo is seemingly planning on eventually passing away and activating some kind of postmortem effect. But when you deliberately design an ability around using Postmortem Nen, you can add features you can't pull off normally, because you've got the guarantee of it chipping away at something that's otherwise difficult for you to keep up, whether that's because it normally takes a lot of maintenance, or because there's pushback you can exhaust yourself against. No matter how tedious it is, a Postmortem Hatsu will single-mindedly, or rather, mindlessly, echo the user's final will, which can be very reliable for someone else to work with. The downside is that it's not adaptive. You don't have a person thoughtfully applying their power anymore, just their lingering drive keeping this thing going and dedicating all of their aura to endlessly do so. So it's effective in very specific cases. If you need something constant or intricate, but that doesn't have its own intelligence beyond a standard Hatsu for rigid concept recognition or sticking to a routine. And unlike a Hatsu that just gets stronger or continues to exist in some partial way after the user disappears, designing an ability around having access to Postmortem Nen in the first place lets you add a whole other mechanic beyond your normal capacity with regular aura use. As long as it's something that just requires your initial capacity, plus the characteristics of Postmortem Nen, you can add another feature to your Hatsu that activates when you achieve Postmortem status. It's the difference between Hisoka applying his normal bungee gum in a way that restores his heart to bring him back to life, and Camilla having a whole ability that can reliably push past an enemy's defenses and forcibly sacrifice their well-being for her own. You can design a Hatsu that you could only ever use through Postmortem Nen. Or you can design a Hatsu that's set up so that when you do use Postmortem Nen, it will be able to do something different that would require extra force, persistence, or freedom through independence beyond your regular capacity. In other words, someone can expand on what their ability initially does to do something extra. So if someone knows the value of Postmortem Nen, and they plan to ultimately unleash some postmortem effect, the Hatsu they choose to develop likely has some clues to what they're trying to do. We might be able to figure out what Chrollo's specific postmortem effect is meant to be by taking into account how Skill Hunter is already structured to be able to work as a Nen power and what Chrollo's goals for it were when he developed it. First, Skill Hunter is a specialist Hatsu that steals the abilities of others. It requires information of and certain interactions with a target, and then it stores their information in this book that Chrollo can conjure whenever to let him use their power by selecting their specific segment. But there's a big difference between stealing Hatsu with Emission and stealing Hatsu with Specialization. Emission's mechanic as a category for a physical effect that you can achieve through using a type of energy as fuel, but that can be batched together and applied in complex combinations to achieve abstract or conceptual applications, is that Emission moves things. Leaning into the themes of the overall series, the known optimization around abilities, and how Nen is treated, if we want to be safe, we can assume that the smallest, zoomed-in, individual instances of emission that an emitter Hatsu is made of would be individual units of aura, individually moving either matter or energy across matter in some direction. But Hatsu are programmed, or more accurately, vibe-coded in the brain. So similar to how 8 units of computer mass, bits, can be grouped together and labeled 1 byte to be used for storing abstract types of data, by simultaneously emitting contents of an overall object, you can carry over the relationships between them. In other words, the conceptual identity of an object, or a certain property from a structure that pieces make together. So emitter powers can be designed to detect abstract concepts and try to emit them from their building blocks, like thoughts, or transfer traits between targets, passing properties anywhere between physical and conceptual from one to another, because both relationships between building blocks and entire objects can ultimately be transferred by clusters of emission. While an emitter power might max out its capacity on a limitlessly taxing homing process, like spanning and measuring the contents of an entire space, or processing physical objects to see if they fit the criteria for what the ability can be used on, limiting spatial hijacking powers to 1 or 2 locations at a time, and property transferal powers to very minimal transferals, the emission part of moving mass, energy, or conceptual properties is more a matter of stamina, and those 3 can be interchangeable. So Emission Hatsu can steal abilities because a person's special powers and advantages ultimately center around their body. whether that's because those powers come from something within their body, or because, theoretically, something else is tethered to them. Magical beasts have physiology, like organs, that give them various powers, and Hatsu comes from circuits stored in the brain, interacting with energy that's more or less produced by the overall body. If you can take whatever structures provide those certain effects, use the body identification of a transferal Hatsu to calculate the corresponding body parts of the user, and then physically emit the necessary structures or materials over, you can transfer those properties to yourself, other complications aside. In theory, ability stealing should be possible with emission alone, and not require specialization, because you're just emitting the physical stuff an ability runs on, which is what seems to be the case with Meruem, for not just the actual Hatsu, but magical beast traits, mental talents, and physical aura production. Benjamin might just be harnessing the post-mortem effects of his loyal soldiers, and he also might not even be an emitter, so at least for now, he doesn't count here, although he would work the same way. But the difference with specialization is that in 3 out of 3 cases we've seen so far, instead of actually stealing someone's ability, the specialists we know keep it in their brain so they hijack their use of it. Opposite of Meruem, Chrollo needs to keep a target alive to still use their Hatsu, through what's probably emission for tethering, but then manipulation for controlling, and conjuration for centering the whole process. Kurapika and Leol only temporarily steal Hatsu, and that's what's important for them because it means they're probably not physically transferring the circuits behind those Hatsu to themselves either. So it's more like all 3 are manipulating targets to use their brains to process their Hatsu over distances, and whatever they conjure, a chain, a book, or an iPod, simplifies that process on their end. Whether the device stores a tether to each target, or a tether is implanted in the brain of each target back to the device, a victim keeps their Hatsu in their own head. Their brain has been hijacked so that someone else can determine when they're allowed to use their own power and forcibly take control of that part of their brain for their own purposes. This is how specialization seems to steal abilities. And the differences between these specific specialist Hatsu depend on the mindsets of their specific users, because they reflect what they want in their abilities, but also how they naturally think. Because it saves on processing and storage capacity if a Hatsu can outsource to their existing talents and thought processes. That's why Pockle chooses to make his Hatsu something as efficient and simple as loosely resembling arrows, because he has the skill to aim those already. Or how Killua's aura transmutes so quickly into lightning, which he's already used to picturing. Leol wants to exploit people and use them for his own gain, so he has a personal affinity for weaponizing the idea of debt, letting him accumulate favors to then borrow the abilities of those people whenever he wants. And Kurapika wants to harm and incapacitate specific people to take back his clan's eyes for his people's memory. So he's good with a power that pierces a person and drains them of their aura as a condition to prevent them from using Nen, while granting him one use of that person's ability to give to anyone on his side. Chrollo's Skill Hunter is like Kurapika's Steel Chain, but with no known limit to the number of people it can affect or to the number of times it can use their abilities, although it has some restrictions on how he can use them. What stands out is that Skill Hunter is meant to permanently grant Chrollo access to a target's ability, although you could also see it as Skill Hunter permanently incapacitating whoever Chrollo steals from. And that's in line with what we know of Chrollo as a character, and what we can see is a clear trend across all the people he's stolen powers from so far. Out of the Hatsu Chrollo's forcibly taken from people, we can divide them into the ones where we've met the users, and the ones where we've only seen the powers. Chrollo wants to dismantle the organized global criminal underworld in Hunter x Hunter's setting that provides a system for the giants within Hunter x Hunter's global civilization to prey on vulnerable civilians and children, like what they did to the kids in Meteor City. It's what he wanted to find a permanent way to deal with in the long term at the cost of his own life back in his childhood. And it's what he still cares about to this day because of whatever he grumbled about doing to that philanthropist guy on the news in the latest chapters. As Kakin and the Hunters Association show, Hunter x Hunter's governments can also be equally predatory and provide these criminal rings a platform because of the advantages they provide in managing populations. So Chrollo's Kurapika's antagonist, because even though he's the only one trying to solve a major problem, and reality has shown him that you have to pull a Lelouch and commit finite short-term sacrifices for long-term resolution, ideals don't always translate to outcomes, and he's warped from the strain of trying to solve the world's issues by himself. Chrollo's stubbornness and insistence on forcibly doing things to cause systemic change, means major consequences are that much more vulnerable to him being misled, and he might overlook better alternatives to his methods if they emerge. The result is that some of his actions might be unnecessary or even counterproductive, making him the opposite of someone like Kurapika, whose only priorities are to hurt some people, which he's willing to accomplish through bad methods, but who the universe puts in situations where his tendencies will end up having him do the right thing. So now he's protecting lives and finding a way to improve a nation, while Chrollo commits to a plan that could only endanger another innocent child, who's like a second coming of his childhood friend, who already lost her life from his plans to protect people like her. Chrollo also builds on concepts from Sensui from YuYu Hakusho. Similar to how Suzuki is an inspiration for both Hisoka and Crazy Slots, and Kuwabara's powers are an inspiration for both the mechanics of Crazy Slots and Gon's scissors. A lot of ideas from Yu Yu Hakusho are repurposed as prototypes in Hunter x Hunter. Sensui's group watch a tape with all sorts of human atrocities, like the things that happened to Sarasa, or the existence of Meteor City in general, that Chrollo and the troupe try to compile in their universe in digital form on the newly emerging web to draw out the people behind those videos and put a permanent stop to what they're doing. But because Sensui's group are only seeing that stuff third hand, and they're also responsible for some of it, they feel a sense of guilt they don't know how to act on. So instead, they decide the whole world is worth destroying. While they look similar, Chrollo lives in that kind of environment, so he gets by because he has a stubborn hope that things can be better, that lives have souls, and that his worldview is correct, as forceful as it might become. In a way, Sensui and Chrollo are more like opposites. Sensui doesn't try to look into things, he just confidently follows his worldview, leading to him jumping from extreme to extreme and harming everyone on every potential side of a particular struggle, which is more typical of an enhancer and similar to a character like Sasuke, fitting how Sensui's ultimate personality-driven ability is specifically to boost the quality of his aura. But Chrollo naturally tries to understand things on his own terms, and has to force himself to stop in order to actually get anywhere or advance his thoughts about something, which is what leads to his stubbornness and his unchanging worldview, and is more typical of a specialist and similar to a character like Naruto. Yu Yu Hakusho ended in part because it was difficult to continue writing a series when the protagonists had already resolved their flaws as people. Hunter x Hunter then started several years later, seemingly designed to be a project that someone could theoretically spend their whole life writing without it getting stale. The world is designed with the idea of balance and continuous cycles in mind, where the audience perspective can be more like a nature documentary. And in line with that, the major protagonists and antagonists have a bit more of an ethical gray area. The main four characters have balance within them, because one of the four of them is the opposite from the other three, but the other three can always be interesting to write about, because while the universe goes through hoops to make sure they stay on the right side of things, and they seem like typical youthful protagonists on the surface, they're fundamentally driven by unheroic qualities. And the antagonists are balanced to always be interesting by having the universe go through hoops to force conflicts around their us versus them mentalities, even though every character has their own version of that. And the story has the villains be some of the most thoughtful people with the most admirable inner drives and priorities, stunted through really convoluted circumstances that twist how they end up developing. That's why Chrollo mirrors Morena, even if they also contrast. Because Morena's group is introduced to show how the Phantom Troop are the opposite of Sensui's old crew. Morena is the worst case ending for Chrollo, of willfully embracing his stubbornness over any chance for his feelings to actually accomplish good. So Morena, like Sensui, wants to destroy the whole world and ruin everyone's lives just because the world can't be perfect. And opposite that, the troupe are motivated by hope that their violent actions in the short term can make the world a better place in the long term, by dismantling the circles of power that would ultimately continue to prey on way more civilians and children than the troupe would in their brief and concentrated attempt to be seen as a safe haven for those powers and buy credibility with those circles. That seems to be why the troupe cosplay as famous fictional villains, because a performer for child's entertainment who plays the role of the villain is willing to take on their hatred to help them grow. And they think that's necessary to do when, like with the philanthropist guy on the news, Hunter x Hunter's media is backed by the predatory authorities Chrollo's trying to free the world from. The whole starting arc of the series was a critique of institutionalized statuses, where only people with superhuman talents that effort can never make up for are still forced to dedicate their lives to prove themselves against lethal challenges, while the actual agency the world runs on is still kept from them until they're able to pass, which is at the discretion of the people running the exam, although they also let takers exploit that hidden source of agency to squander the potential of the other applicants, who they're preventing from learning about this source of power. It's an arc where the inner hero of the main characters, Leorio, risks his life despite not having a fair shot against competitors with way more talent, because he's not allowed to learn to save treatable diseases in a world where it turns out there's even a power system that lets any person pretty much learn to cure any disease, but is kept from civilians because it's easier for the people on top to maintain their empires by limiting the developments of new people with actual agency to certain avenues at their discretion. The next arc about the Hunters Association itself shows how it's not inherently run by heroic people, but can provide a platform for anyone to have power over the rest of the world. And the idea that you don't even need to have individual talents, but be a mascot for public feelings to take that throne, is then used as a foundation for the next arc, that's largely about the disconnect and oppression that comes from fully distinguishing the people who can have power over society from the people who can't from birth. The Phantom Troop are like Robin Hood, but willing to sacrifice individual lives for the greater good, because Hunter x Hunter's current structure of power is in the hands of the villains, and more lives will be ruined over time if nothing's ever done. They're not like Morena's crew, who want to harm civilians to let out their own aggression. If anyone in the group is like that, it would be Phaeton or Uvo, who take personal joy in causing suffering, but still ultimately want to do it to help the world in the bigger picture. But Chrollo has only ever been shown to be content with sacrificing people when they don't pass his judgy values, like the district around the auction hall occupied and walled off by the underworld, or anyone willing to give money to that underworld for personal gain, or people willing to watch and encourage a deathmatch for personal entertainment. The three people we know Chrollo's stolen abilities from are a bodyguard and handyman of the leaders of that global syndicate Chrollo has wanted to take predatory power away from, another bodyguard and self-centered breadwinner of that global syndicate who specifically thought people didn't have souls but was fine protecting the local bosses causing misery to civilians for profit, and an assassin who would execute unsuspecting people under the orders of the leaders of that global syndicate, again for profit. And the three abilities we've seen, whose users we don't know firsthand, are one that is specifically mentioned to belong to someone manipulative who can concerningly easily dehumanize and dissociate from the gravity of their actions, one that belonged to someone whose mindset and goals are best summarized by an ability to be a monster that tortures and devours people behind closed doors, and one framed by the user as a true love seeker that really works by letting you non-consensually track and find information on an unsuspecting target of your chosen specifications. That is named after an old song from a group of child performers where the whole gimmick was that the producers were getting these kids to sing about romantic concepts they clearly didn't understand to amuse an older audience. Given what wider entity Chrollo has been trying to fight the entire time he's had Skill Hunter, and the fact that all of the abilities he's stolen have either been from people who we know were integral to supporting the leaders of a global structure that were providing a platform for traffickers, or have directly trafficky undertones, it seems like finding the darkness in the psyches of people he steals from is less of a hobby and more a reflection of Chrollo's mindset toward the people he chooses to steal from. He's always been the type to want to rationalize things, but he's also stubborn and emotionally judgy about his morals, like Kurapika. So exploring that darkness would be a habitual form of validation, because chances are, since Machi's attitude around him makes it seem like he's always been following a single stubborn plan from childhood, Skill Hunter is Chrollo's way of taking power from the people that are the foundation of the practices he wants to make impossible, while also being an avenue for him to expand his own power so he becomes more capable over time. But ultimately, Chrollo's goal seems to be to put a system in place so that nobody can prey on civilians, at least children, ever again, even if it's a fault of his stubbornness, because as One Piece points out, a rigid system is the opposite of what something evolving and organic, like humanity, needs in order to thrive and grow. But it could also be why Skill Hunter is more of a permanent incapacitation, unlike Steel Chain and Rental Pod. In line with that though, we know Chrollo has at least one more aspect to his ability that branches from what it does already and needs Postmortem Nen in order to work. And because he was raised in Meteor City, the place every society in the world used as a dumping ground to alleviate all their excess pressure, like the Hidden Rain village that birthed the original Akatsuki and Pain, Chrollo's methods prioritize supporting Meteor City. But he's also come to see and value the usefulness of having one specific sacrifice that everything can dump all of their problems onto. You don't have to worry about balance if everyone agrees that one guy can take an infinite amount of negatives for all of them. And with Nen, there can be contracts worse than death. Chrollo is going to deliberately sacrifice himself to unleash a Nen effect that will cause some kind of worldwide shift in power dynamics, in a way that cancels out the remaining power of the existing predatory parties, and makes it very difficult for new ones to be established in the future. It's something that's not guaranteed to be successful, since Chrollo tries to take as many steps as he can to support the eventual effectiveness or invincibility of its eventual creation while he's still alive, but it's also not something that takes effect instantaneously or fully automatically, because the troops still have to follow some plan when he's gone. And the issue with postmortem abilities is that they can no longer be applied adaptively. But a system broad enough to permanently regulate the world in accordance with somebody's values would have to be. So whatever Chrollo's final ability does is something that creates that system for it to then run independently. Chrollo's postmortem mechanic is just going to be a foundation for that system to then be built from. So given he has a stubborn worldview, he believes in souls, he's forcing his convictions onto the world, his Hatsu operates by reconfiguring someone's brain to override and hijack part of them, he has 12 disciples, his ability is centered around a book, and for efficiency's sake, his postmortem effect is going to be following the themes and mechanics of Skill Hunter in a way that's also fitting for his character. It's very possible that Chrollo's postmortem effect mirrors Morena's recently introduced Hatsu, and spreads his ability, or something like it, to everyone within the book's pages, but also overriding their memories or ambitions with his own, to create an effect like he's spreading a gospel. He was close to Paku, and she confided in him about her memory transferal Hatsu, so maybe that was because they worked together to design their powers, and as a result, their abilities had overlap. But it would mean that if Silva hasn't found a way to undo Skill Hunter's effect, there's a strong chance that when Chrollo passes away, Silva is going to be affected by some sort of transformation, like what Dio's Fleshbud did to Okuyasu's father. Just likely something purely mental rather than physical. We won't find out for another 50 years. But I don't know. So take bets. What you think is going to happen, what you think it's going to be. We won't ever get another season of the anime either. We're all kind of screwed there.